In the golden glow of a chandelier-lit ballroom where wealth and pride dripped from every corner, guests in tuxedos and glittering gowns gathered for what was supposed to be another predictable evening of fine dining, speeches, and silent judgments that only the rich seemed to savor. Yet within this gilded space, a story was quietly unraveling that would challenge everything about the way one powerful man saw the world. And it all began not with a deal struck across a mahogany table, nor with a signature on a billion-dollar contract, but with the hesitant steps of a boy whom most dismissed as fragile, broken, and destined to forever be sheltered behind the towering shadow of his father. A boy with silver blonde hair and a bright smile who, despite the tremors in his small legs and the brace around his ankle, longed for nothing more than to be treated, not as an heir to unthinkable wealth, but as a child who could laugh, stumble, and dance like anyone else. And the universe decided that his wish would be answered not by those seated beside crystal glasses of champagne, but by a woman in a pressed white uniform carrying trays of hors d'oeuvre. A waitress whose skin glowed like polished mahogany, whose eyes carried the quiet weight of countless struggles endured in silence, and whose spirit, though unseen by the powerful men and women she served, was unbreakable. She had known poverty, heartbreak, and the sting of being judged for the color of her skin long before stepping foot in this ballroom, but she carried herself with dignity, her back straight and her smile warm, even as whispers and dismissive glances followed her steps. Yet it was precisely this woman whom fate chose to notice the boy when no one else did. For while the billionaire father, tall, silver-haired, and wrapped in an aura of cold authority, exchanged handshakes with governors and CEOs, his son sat quietly at the edge of the dance floor, his small hands folded nervously, watching couples swirl to the music of a live orchestra with longing in his wide blue eyes. A longing that the waitress, while gliding past with a tray, instantly recognized because it mirrored the same yearning she had once carried in her childhood when others told her she did not belong, and so, defying the unspoken boundaries that separated staff from guests, she bent down and whispered gently to the boy, "Would you like to try?" And for the first time that night, his face lit up with a joy so pure it cut through the thick air of pretense around them, and though his legs wobbled when he stood, she did not pity him. She did not offer to lead. Instead, she extended her hand and let him guide her onto the wooden floor, where gasps rose among the wealthy as the child, with determination burning in his trembling limbs, placed one foot forward and then another, awkwardly yet proudly, and the waitress followed his lead as though he were the most skilled dancer in the room. Her smile steady, her encouragement unspoken but felt, and in that fragile exchange, something extraordinary happened. The boy's laughter rose above the violins. His confidence grew with every beat, and his eyes shone with the triumph of a spirit no disability could cage, while across the room the billionaire father, distracted from his conversation, turned his gaze toward the commotion, and what he saw froze him in place, not embarrassment, not weakness, but his son commanding the floor. His son leading, his son alive in a way he had never allowed himself to be, and at his side a waitress who treated him not as a fragile heir, but as a boy worthy of trust, freedom, and dignity. And in that instant the father's carefully built world of status and control trembled, for he realized that for all his money and power he had failed to give his son the very thing this woman, whom society placed beneath him, had given so freely: belief, respect, and joy. And though the guests whispered, some with ridicule, some with awe, none of their words mattered to the boy who danced and the waitress who followed his lead. For on that floor it was not about wealth or status, but about courage and connection. And as the billionaire's heart swelled with emotions he had long buried, shame for his blindness, pride for his son, gratitude for this woman, his life, though he did not yet understand it fully, began to change forever. For he would never again see his son as broken, nor the world in the same narrow colors. And as the night unfolded, as the boy stumbled and rose again with laughter, as the waitress kept her faith in him with every step, and as the billionaire's eyes grew wet with tears he could not hide. A seed was planted that would bloom into a transformation touching not only his empire but his very soul. And dear viewers, if this story has already stirred something in your heart, if you too believe that kindness and courage can break through the hardest walls, then stay with us, because what comes next will move you even more deeply. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that could remind you of the power of humanity. Because together we are more than just listeners. We are a family of hearts that choose to believe in hope, love, and change. The music faded that night, but the echo of those footsteps, the uneven, stumbling yet triumphant dance of a child who had finally been allowed to lead, did not leave the billionaire's mind. And as the final applause of the guests dwindled, as the boy collapsed into laughter in the waitress's arms, and as she gently guided him back to his seat with dignity, the father found himself paralyzed by a torrent of emotions he had never known. Could coexist within one heart. Pride so fierce it brought him to tears. Shame so heavy it made his chest ache. Gratitude so deep it silenced the polished words he had rehearsed for decades in boardrooms. And as he approached his son and the woman who had dared to give him wings, he found himself unable to speak, only watching the sparkle in his boy's eyes, the same sparkle he had once believed extinguished forever. And though the night ended with laughter and music, its true ending was the beginning of a change that would ripple far beyond the ballroom. Because in the days that followed, the billionaire could no longer sit in his glass tower without remembering how a single act of kindness had shown him his blindness, no longer measure his legacy in profits. When his son's joy had shown him the emptiness of numbers, no longer look at people in uniforms serving his table as invisible, for he now saw them as carriers of unseen courage and humanity. And so he searched for the waitress, finding her in the small diner where she worked mornings to support her younger siblings. And when he walked in, dressed not in his tuxedo, but in plain clothes, she froze in disbelief, fearing reprimand or worse, yet instead he bowed his head, something no one had seen him do before, and thanked her, truly thanked her, for giving his son what billions of dollars could not buy. And from that day on, his world shifted. His empire began to reflect not only ambition but compassion. His boardrooms began to hear words like inclusion and empathy, alongside profits and expansion, and more than that, he began to walk beside his son, not as a protector building walls of pity around him, but as a father letting him explore, stumble, fall, and rise again, always remembering that a dance is beautiful, not because it is flawless, but because it is shared. And as weeks turned into months, the story of that night spread. Some told it as gossip, mocking how a billionaire was humbled by a waitress. Others told it as inspiration, proof that hearts can change in the unlikeliest of places. But to the father and the boy, it was simply the night they both learned freedom. The boy, freedom to lead without fear of being seen as broken, and the father, freedom from the prison of pride that had blinded him. And as for the waitress, her life too was transformed, not because of handouts or pity, but because the billionaire recognized her value, her insight, and her humanity, offering her opportunities not as charity, but as partnership, funding a foundation in her name, dedicated to empowering children with disabilities, giving her the chance to expand her quiet courage into a movement that touched thousands. And soon the world came to know her, not as the waitress in a ballroom, but as the woman who taught a billionaire how to see. And though cameras would later capture the father standing beside her at events, speaking of change and vision, he never once forgot the humility of that first night, the trembling steps of his son, and the quiet faith of the woman who let him lead. And in the end, his greatest wealth was not measured in his fortune, but in the laughter of his boy, the lives he touched through compassion, and the legacy of hope he left behind. And to you watching this story, remember, Transformation often begins not with grand gestures, but with a simple act of trust, of allowing someone to be seen, to lead, to shine. And if this story has moved your heart, if it has reminded you of the power of love, humility, and courage, then do not let it stop here. Carry it with you into your own life. Share it with others, and most of all, subscribe to our channel. Because every story we bring you is a reminder that humanity is not lost, that change is possible, and that together, through listening, sharing, and believing, we can create a world where even the smallest steps can lead to the greatest dances of all.